The millionaire was rescued by a street kid and, in return, took him to his luxurious home. But when the press found out, Gabriel found himself rejected once again. The streets were cold that night. Gabriel walked slowly, searching for a place to sleep. His bare feet shuffled along the wet pavement, his eyes moving from shadow to shadow. He needed somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. But there wasn't much of that in this part of the city. He tightened the old jacket around his shoulders, its worn fabric barely providing warmth. A sound caught his attention, a muffled voice, almost like a cry for help. Gabriel paused, his heart pounding. It came from the alley on his right. He knew he should keep walking. He had enough trouble in his life without adding someone else's, but curiosity got the better of him. Slowly, he approached the alley. There, in the dim light, he saw two men. One was on the ground, his face bloodied. The other one was standing over him, holding something, maybe a knife. Gabriel's breath caught in his throat. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. He had to do something. "Hey!" Gabriel shouted, his voice breaking in fear. The man turned. He stared at Gabriel for a moment, eyes dark and dangerous. Gabriel took a step back, but he didn't run. He couldn't. Not now. The man scowled, glanced down at his victim, and then made a decision. He ran, disappearing into the night. Gabriel moved closer to the man on the ground. He was older, maybe in his 40s, wearing a suit that was now torn and dirty. He was struggling to sit up, his breath coming out in short, painful gasps. Gabriel crouched beside him. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man looked up at him, eyes unfocused. I think so," he managed to say, wincing in pain. Gabriel took a deep breath. He looked around, making sure no one else was coming. Then, without thinking too much, he asked, "Do you have a car around here? I can help you get there." The man nodded slightly, pointing toward the end of the alley. Gabriel helped him to his feet, feeling the weight of the man's body as he leaned heavily against him. They walked slowly, Gabriel glancing over his shoulder, making sure they weren't being followed. Once they reached the car, a black sedan, Gabriel opened the door and helped the man into the passenger seat. The man groaned as he settled down, closing his eyes. Gabriel hesitated, unsure of what to do next. He could just walk away. But something about the man made him stay. "Where do you live?" Gabriel asked. The man opened his eyes and looked at Gabriel, squinting as if trying to focus. "Downtown, near Park Avenue," he said. Gabriel nodded. He had no idea where that was exactly, but he figured he could try. He moved around to the driver's side, climbing in. He had never driven a car before. He barely even knew how to start it, but he found the keys in the ignition and turned them, feeling the engine roar to life beneath him. The car lurched forward, and Gabriel's heart jumped. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to keep it steady. The man beside him let out a pained groan, and Gabriel glanced at him, his face pale and eyes closed again. Gabriel took a deep breath, focusing on the road. After what felt like an eternity, Gabriel finally managed to reach downtown. He had to ask for directions twice, but eventually, he found Park Avenue. The man opened his eyes again and pointed toward a tall building with bright lights and a doorman at the entrance. Gabriel pulled up to the curb. "We're here," he said, his voice shaking. The man struggled to sit up, looking at Gabriel with tired eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. He paused, then added, "Why did you help me?" Gabriel looked away, feeling the weight of the man's question. He didn't have an answer, or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to say it. Instead, he looked back at the man and blurted out, "Can you pretend to be my dad?" The man blinked, confused. "What?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Gabriel swallowed hard. "Just for a little while," he said. I need someone to pretend to be my dad, just for a bit." The man stared at him, and for a moment, Gabriel thought he might laugh or yell at him, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded slowly, his eyes still filled with pain. "Okay," he whispered. "I can do that." Gabriel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He helped the man out of the car, and together, they made their way to the building's entrance. The doorman rushed forward, looking alarmed at the sight of the man, but the man waved him off. "He's with me," the man said, his voice stronger now. Gabriel followed them inside, feeling the warmth of the lobby wash over him. It was the first time in a long time he felt warmth like that. He looked around, taking in the marble floors, the fancy furniture. Everything was so different from what he was used to. The doorman helped the man into the elevator, and Gabriel followed. They rode up in silence, the man leaning against the wall, his breathing still labored. When they reached the top floor, the elevator doors opened to reveal a large, beautifully decorated apartment. Gabriel helped the man to a couch, where he sank down with a sigh. The man looked up at Gabriel, his eyes filled with something Gabriel couldn't quite place. Gratitude, maybe, or curiosity. He couldn't tell. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Gabriel," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded. "I'm Leonardo," he said. He paused, then added, "You can stay here tonight, Gabriel. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Gabriel nodded, unsure of what to say. He watched as Leonardo closed his eyes, exhaustion finally taking over. Gabriel looked around the room, taking in the luxury that surrounded him. It felt strange, unreal, but for now, it was safe, and that was enough. He found a spot on the floor near the couch, curling up in his jacket. The warmth of the apartment made him feel drowsy, his eyes growing heavy. He closed them, letting the exhaustion of the day take over. For the first time in a long time, Gabriel felt a glimmer of hope, however small it was. Gabriel woke up to the sound of a voice, unfamiliar and clear. He blinked his eyes open, taking in the soft light streaming through the windows. He was still in the same spot, curled up on the floor by the couch. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he remembered the fancy apartment, the man he helped, Leonardo. "Gabriel," Leonardo's voice called out. Gabriel sat up, rubbing his eyes. Leonardo was on the couch, looking at him. His face still had bruises, but he looked more alert now, less like a man who had just been beaten in an alley. "Are you hungry?" Leonardo asked, his voice gentler than Gabriel expected. Gabriel hesitated. He was starving, actually, but he didn't want to seem too eager. He shrugged, mumbling, "A little." Leonardo nodded and slowly stood up, grimacing as he moved. "Come on, let's see what we can find." Gabriel followed Leonardo into the kitchen, a huge space with marble counters and shiny appliances. He watched as Leonardo opened the fridge, pulling out bread, eggs, and milk. He moved carefully, as if every movement pained him. Gabriel stayed by the door, not wanting to get in the way. "Do you like scrambled eggs?" Leonardo asked, glancing at Gabriel. Gabriel nodded. "Yeah, sure." Leonardo began cooking, and Gabriel watched in silence. The sizzling sound of the eggs filled the kitchen, and the smell made Gabriel's stomach rumble. He felt a strange mix of comfort and unease. It had been a long time since anyone had made him breakfast. The last time he remembered was before his parents had left. "Here," Leonardo said, handing him a plate. Gabriel took it, staring at the food. He didn't say anything, just sat at the table and began eating. The eggs were warm, soft, and it felt strange to eat something freshly made. He was used to leftovers, scraps, whatever he could find. Leonardo sat across from him, a small smile on his face. "You know," he said, "you were pretty brave last night. What you did, it took courage." Gabriel didn't look up, he just shrugged. "I couldn't just walk away?" Leonardo nodded. "Not many people would have done that." They ate in silence for a while, the tension between them slowly easing. When Gabriel finished, he put his fork down, looking at Leonardo. "So, what now?" he asked. Leonardo leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. "You said you wanted me to pretend to be your dad," he said, his voice careful. "Why? What's going on, Gabriel?" Gabriel hesitated. He didn't like talking about it, but he figured Leonardo deserved to know, at least a little. He looked down at the table, his fingers tracing the edge of his plate. I don't have anyone," he said quietly, "and it's hard out there. People don't take you seriously when you're just some kid on the street." Leonardo watched him, his expression softening. "How long have you been on your own?" Gabriel shrugged. "A while, since I was maybe 8. I don't remember exactly." Leonardo nodded slowly. He didn't push for more details. Instead, he stood up, taking their plates to the sink. "You can stay here for now," he said, his back to Gabriel. "But we'll have to figure out something long-term. You can't just live on the streets." Gabriel swallowed, a mix of relief and fear washing over him. He wanted to believe Leonardo, but he had learned the hard way not to trust too easily. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Leonardo turned, meeting Gabriel's eyes. "Because you helped me when no one else would," he said simply. "And because maybe I need this as much as you do." Gabriel didn't know what to say to that. He nodded, looking away, his eyes fixed on the floor. Later, Leonardo showed Gabriel to a guest room. It was big, with a bed that looked softer than anything Gabriel had ever seen. He stood by the door, unsure if he should even step inside. "It's yours," Leonardo said, "for as long as you need it." Gabriel finally stepped inside, touching the bed, the blankets. It felt unreal, like he was in someone else's life. He turned to Leonardo, his voice hesitant. "Are you sure? I mean, this place, it's too nice." Leonardo smiled, though there was sadness in his eyes. "I'm sure. You deserve somewhere safe, Gabriel." Gabriel nodded, still not quite believing it. He watched as Leonardo left the room, closing the door gently behind him. For a moment, Gabriel stood there, taking it all in. The warmth of the room, the softness of the bed. It was all so different from the cold concrete and hard pavement he was used to. He lay down on the bed, feeling the softness envelop him. He closed his eyes, his body finally relaxing. He didn't know how long this would last, but for now, it was enough. He had a roof over his head, a bed to sleep in, and someone who seemed to care. A knock on the door made him sit up. Leonardo peeked inside. "I was thinking," he said, "maybe we could get you some clothes. You know, ones that fit better." Gabriel looked down at his worn-out clothes. They were too small, too dirty. He nodded. "Okay." Leonardo smiled. "Great. We can go now if you're up for it." Gabriel followed Leonardo out of the apartment, down to the street. They took a cab to a nearby shopping center. Gabriel had never been in a place like this. It was all glass walls and fancy storefronts. He kept his head down, not wanting to draw attention to himself. Leonardo led him into a clothing store, the kind with mannequins dressed in expensive outfits. Gabriel felt out of place. He glanced at the price tags, his eyes widening. "This is too much," he mumbled. Leonardo shook his head. "It's fine. You need good clothes." Gabriel reluctantly let Leonardo help him pick out a few things. Jeans, shirts, a jacket. He tried them on, feeling strange in the dressing room. When he came out, Leonardo gave him an approving nod. "You look good, Gabriel." Gabriel shifted uncomfortably. "Thanks." After they paid, Leonardo led him out, and they walked through the mall. Gabriel noticed the families, parents with their kids, and he felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. He glanced at Leonardo, wondering what it would be like to have someone like that, someone who cared. Back at the apartment, Gabriel put the new clothes away, feeling a strange sense of belonging he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked at Leonardo, who was sitting on the couch, a tired smile on his face. "Thank you," Gabriel said, his voice quiet. Leonardo looked at him, a warmth in his eyes. "You don't have to thank me, Gabriel. Just promise me you'll try to trust me, at least a little." Gabriel nodded, though he wasn't sure how easy that would be. But he wanted to try. He wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have something more, something better. The morning light filtered through the curtain, waking Gabriel. He blinked, sitting up in the soft bed. For a second, he forgot where he was. The comfort, the warmth, all of it felt unfamiliar. But then he remembered Leonardo, the fancy apartment. It was real. He rubbed his eyes and stood up, listening to the faint sounds coming from the kitchen. Gabriel walked out of the room, following the sound. He found Leonardo at the stove, cooking again. The smell of bacon filled the air, and Gabriel's stomach growled. He tried to ignore it, not wanting to seem too eager. "Morning," Leonardo said, glancing over his shoulder. "I hope you like bacon." Gabriel nodded. "Yeah, I do." Leonardo smiled and motioned for him to sit. "Breakfast will be ready in a minute. You sleep okay?" Gabriel shrugged. "Yeah, better than usual." Leonardo nodded, flipping the bacon in the pan. Good." He paused for a moment, then added, "I was thinking, maybe we should make a plan, about what's next." Gabriel shifted in his seat, the idea of making plans making him uneasy. He had never really planned anything before, just survived day by day. "Like what?" he asked. Leonardo turned off the stove and brought the food to the table. He sat across from Gabriel, a thoughtful look on his face. "Well, for starters, you need to go to school." Gabriel frowned, his stomach twisting at the thought. "School?" he echoed. Leonardo nodded. "Yeah, you need an education, Gabriel. It's important." Gabriel looked down at his plate, suddenly losing his appetite. "I don't know," he mumbled. "I've been out of school for a long time. I don't think I'd fit in." Leonardo leaned forward, his voice gentle. "I know it's not going to be easy, but I think it's worth a try. I'll help you, whatever you need." Gabriel hesitated. He didn't want to disappoint Leonardo, But the thought of school scared him. He had seen the kids there, in their uniforms, laughing with friends. He couldn't imagine himself in that world. He shook his head. "I don't think it's a good idea," he said. Leonardo sighed, nodding slowly. "Okay, we don't have to decide right now, but just think about it, all right?" Gabriel nodded, grateful that Leonardo wasn't pushing him. They ate the rest of their breakfast in silence, the tension hanging in the air. After they finished, Leonardo looked at Gabriel, a hopeful smile on his face. "How about we do something fun today? Maybe go see a movie?" Gabriel shrugged. "I guess." Leonardo smiled wider. "All right, let's go then." They left the apartment and walked down the street, Leonardo pointing out different buildings and places as they went. Gabriel listened, though he still felt out of place. Everything around them was so different from what he was used to. The clean streets, the well-dressed people, the laughter. It felt like another world. At the theater, Leonardo bought tickets for an action movie, and they found seats near the back. As the movie started, Gabriel found himself getting lost in it, forgetting his worries for a while. He watched the screen, the bright colors and loud sounds drawing him in. After the movie, they walked back to the apartment. Gabriel felt a little lighter, a small smile tugging at his lips. It was strange, feeling something like happiness. He wasn't used to it. Leonardo looked over at him as they walked. "You look like you enjoyed that," he said. Gabriel shrugged, trying to act casual. "It was all right," he said, but he couldn't hide the smile. Leonardo laughed softly. "I'm glad." Back at the apartment, Leonardo seemed to hesitate for a moment before speaking. "Gabriel, I want to help you, really help you. But for that, I need you to trust me." Gabriel looked at him, the words hanging in the air. Trust, it was a word he didn't use lightly. He had trusted before, and it had only brought him pain. He swallowed, not sure what to say. Leonardo continued, his voice serious. "I know it's hard, but I'm not going anywhere, okay? I mean it." Gabriel nodded, but he didn't say anything. He wanted to believe Leonardo, but a part of him still held back, afraid to let himself get comfortable. Leonardo reached out, putting a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. "Just take it one day at a time," he said. "That's all I'm asking." Gabriel looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he whispered. "One day at a time." Leonardo smiled, giving Gabriel's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "That's all I need." That night, Gabriel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind was racing, thoughts tumbling over each other. The day had been different from what he was used to. Better, but it scared him. He wasn't sure if he could trust it, if it would last. He closed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away. Just one day at a time, he told himself. Just one day. Morning came too soon. Gabriel opened his eyes, the sunlight streaming in through the curtain. He had barely slept, his mind restless with the thought of what was coming. Leonardo had brought up school again the night before, and Gabriel had reluctantly agreed to give it a try. He wasn't sure why he had said yes. Maybe because Leonardo had looked at him with that hopeful expression, or maybe because he just didn't want to disappoint him. Either way, today was the day. Leonardo knocked gently on the door, peeking in. "Hey, Gabriel, you ready?" he asked, his voice soft. Gabriel nodded, though he didn't feel ready at all. He got up, putting on the clothes Leonardo had bought him. They were clean and new, but they didn't feel like his. He looked in the mirror, barely recognizing the boy staring back at him. He looked normal, and that scared him. Leonardo was waiting in the kitchen, a small smile on his face. "You look good," he said, sliding a plate of toast across the table. "Eat something before we go." Gabriel sat down, staring at the toast. His stomach felt tight, and he wasn't sure if he could eat, but he forced himself to take a bite, not wanting to worry Leonardo. They ate in silence, the tension heavy between them. After breakfast, Leonardo grabbed his keys, giving Gabriel an encouraging smile. "Ready?" Gabriel nodded, though his heart was pounding. They left the apartment, taking the elevator down to the street. The school wasn't far, just a few blocks away. They walked in silence, the city bustling around them. Gabriel kept his head down, his hands shoved deep in his pocket. When they reached the school, Leonardo paused, looking at Gabriel. "You're going to do great," he said. "Just take it one step at a time, okay?" Gabriel nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He followed Leonardo inside, the sounds of students echoing down the hallways. He felt like everyone was staring at him, though most of the kids were too busy with their own conversations to notice. Leonardo led him to the office, speaking with the receptionist while Gabriel stood by the door, feeling out of place. After a moment, the receptionist smiled at Gabriel. "Welcome, Gabriel. We're glad to have you here," she said. Gabriel forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. She handed him a schedule and pointed him in the direction of his first class. Leonardo gave Gabriel a reassuring nod. "I'll be here to pick you up after school, okay? Just hang in there." Gabriel nodded, watching as Leonardo walked away. He took a deep breath, turning to head to his class. He felt like an outsider, surrounded by kids who seemed to belong. He found the classroom, slipping inside and taking a seat at the back. The teacher gave him a polite smile, but didn't make a big deal of his arrival, which Gabriel was grateful for. As the lesson began, Gabriel tried to focus, but his mind kept wandering. The other students were whispering, passing notes, laughing. Gabriel felt a pang of envy. They all seemed so comfortable, like they belonged there. He glanced at the clock, wishing the day would end already. When the bell finally rang for lunch, Gabriel got up, not sure where to go. He walked through the halls, keeping his head down. He found a spot outside, away from the crowd, and sat down on the steps. He pulled out the lunch Leonardo had packed for him, but he couldn't bring himself to eat. His stomach was still in knots. He watched the other kids, groups of friends laughing, talking. He felt a wave of loneliness wash over him. He didn't belong here. He never would. He was just a kid from the streets, pretending to fit in. He closed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away, but they wouldn't leave. When the final bell rang, Gabriel was the first one out of the classroom. He walked quickly down the hall, his heart pounding. He just wanted to get out, to leave this place behind. He pushed through the doors, stepping out onto the street. He looked around, searching for Leonardo. Leonardo was there, waiting by the gate. He smiled when he saw Gabriel, waving him over. "Hey, how was it?" he asked. Gabriel shrugged, not meeting Leonardo's eyes. "It was fine," he mumbled. Leonardo studied him for a moment, his smile fading. "Gabriel, talk to me. What happened?" Gabriel shook his head, his throat tightening. "I don't belong there," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't fit in." Leonardo's face softened, and he stepped closer, placing a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. "It was your first day. It's going to take time, Gabriel. You can't expect to feel comfortable right away." Gabriel looked up at him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can do it," he admitted. "I don't want to be there." Leonardo nodded slowly, his expression serious. "Okay, let's take a step back, then. We don't have to force it, but I still think it's important for you to have an education. Maybe we can find another way, something that works better for you." Gabriel swallowed, not sure what to say. He felt a mixture of relief and guilt. He didn't want to disappoint Leonardo, but he also couldn't force himself to do something that felt so wrong. He nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. Leonardo smiled, giving Gabriel's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We'll figure it out, together." They walked back to the apartment in silence, Gabriel feeling drained. When they got inside, Leonardo made them both a cup of tea, and they sat at the kitchen table. Gabriel stared at the steam rising from his cup, his mind still racing. Leonardo watched him, his eyes filled with concern. "You're not alone anymore, Gabriel," he said softly. "We're in this together, okay? Whatever you need, I'm here." Gabriel looked up at him, the words sinking in. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Leonardo smiled back, a warmth in his eyes. "One day at a time. Remember." Gabriel nodded. "One day at a time." That night, as Gabriel lay in bed, he thought about the day. It hadn't gone the way he wanted, but maybe that was okay. Maybe it was enough that he had tried. He closed his eyes, letting out a slow breath. One day at a time. He could do that. The next morning, Gabriel woke to the sound of Leonardo's phone ringing. The noise was sharp, cutting through the quiet of the apartment. Gabriel sat up, rubbing his eyes, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. He could hear Leonardo's voice in the living room, tense and low. He sounded frustrated, almost angry. Gabriel got up and moved to the doorway, peering out. Leonardo was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear, his brows furrowed. Gabriel couldn't hear everything, but the few words he caught made his stomach twist. "No, I didn't plan on making this public. Yes, I know what this looks like, but it's not like that. He's just a kid." Gabriel's heart sank. He knew what it was about. It had to be about him. He felt a pang of fear. He thought he could stay here, that maybe this place could be safe. But now, everything felt like it was slipping away. Leonardo hung up, sighing deeply. He turned and saw Gabriel standing there, his expression softening. "Hey," he said, trying to smile. "Sorry, did I wake you up?" Gabriel shook his head, his voice quiet. "Is everything okay?" Leonardo hesitated, then gestured for Gabriel to come over to the couch. Gabriel sat down, feeling the tension in the air. Leonardo sat beside him, rubbing a hand over his face. "There's been some news," he said carefully. Someone must have seen us together, and now there are stories going around about you and me." Gabriel frowned. "What kind of stories?" Leonardo sighed. "They're saying all sorts of things, that I'm using you, that this is some kind of publicity stunt. They don't understand what's happening, and they're making assumptions." Gabriel's chest tightened. He looked down, his mind racing. "Does that mean I have to leave?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Leonardo shook his head immediately. "No, absolutely not. I told you, I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. But this does mean things might get a little complicated. There are going to be people watching, asking questions." Gabriel felt a knot of fear growing in his stomach. He had never liked attention. He had always tried to stay invisible, to avoid being noticed. The idea of people watching him, talking about him, it made him feel exposed, vulnerable. Leonardo seemed to sense his fear, and he reached out, placing a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. "Listen to me," he said. "You don't have to worry about any of this. I'm going to take care of it. I just need you to trust me, okay?" Gabriel nodded, though he wasn't sure how he felt. He wanted to believe Leonardo, but the fear was still there, gnawing at him. The day passed slowly, the tension hanging over them like a storm cloud. Leonardo was on the phone several times, speaking with different people, trying to control the situation. Gabriel stayed in his room, trying to stay out of the way. He felt like a burden, like he was causing trouble just by being there. By evening, the news had spread. Leonardo turned on the TV, and Gabriel watched as a reporter spoke about them, his picture flashing on the screen. He looked so out of place, a street kid next to Leonardo, a wealthy businessman. The reporter talked about how Leonardo had been seen with Gabriel, questioning why a man like him would be involved with a boy from the streets. Gabriel felt a wave of shame wash over him. He looked down, not wanting to see any more. "Oh, why are they doing this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Leonardo shook his head, his eyes sad. "People like to make stories out of things they don't understand," he said. "They see something different, and they want to twist it into something that makes sense to them." Gabriel swallowed hard, the fear and shame mixing together, making it hard to breathe. "Maybe I should just go," he whispered. I don't want to cause you any trouble." Leonardo turned to him, his expression firm. "No, you're not going anywhere. This isn't your fault, Gabriel. You did nothing wrong." Gabriel looked at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. He wanted to believe him, but it was hard. He had never been wanted before. It was hard to believe that someone would fight for him. Later that night, as they sat in the living room, Leonardo looked over at Gabriel, his eyes filled with something Gabriel couldn't quite read. "I know this is scary," he said quietly, "but I need you to know that I'm not giving up on you. No matter what they say, no matter what happens, you're not alone anymore." Gabriel nodded, his throat tight. He looked away, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. He didn't want to cry. He didn't want Leonardo to see just how scared he really was. Leonardo reached over, putting a hand on Gabriel's back. "We'll get through this, one day at a time, remember?" Gabriel took a deep breath, nodding. "One day at a time," he echoed. The next morning, Gabriel woke to the sound of knocking at the door. He sat up, his heart pounding. Leonardo was already awake, moving toward the door. He opened it to reveal a group of reporters, their cameras flashing, their voices loud and demanding. "Mr. Leonardo, can you comment on the boy? Who is he to you? Is this some sort of charity case, or is there more to the story?" Leonardo held up a hand, his face calm but firm. "No comments right now. Please respect our privacy." He shut the door, locking it, and turned to Gabriel, who was standing in the hallway, his eyes wide with fear. Leonardo walked over to him, his expression softening. "I'm sorry, Gabriel. I didn't expect them to come here." Gabriel swallowed, his hands trembling. I don't like this, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Leonardo nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Gabriel's shoulder. I know, neither do I, but we're going to figure this out, okay? I promise, Gabriel nodded, though the fear still sat heavy in his chest. He followed Leonardo to the kitchen, trying to focus on the normal things. Breakfast, the smell of coffee, the warmth of the apartment. But the reporter's voices still echoed in his mind, reminding him of how exposed he was. Leonardo sat down across from him, his eyes filled with concern. I want you to know something, St. Gabriel, he said. No matter what happens, no matter what they say, you're part of my life now. I don't care what anyone else thinks. Gabriel looked up at him, his eyes searching Leonardo's face. He saw the sincerity there, the promise. He took a deep breath, trying to let go of the fear, even if just a little. Okay, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I'll try. Leonardo smiled, a warmth in his eyes. That's all I need, one day at a time, remember? Gabriel nodded. Not one day at a time. The days after the reporters showed up were tense. Gabriel kept to himself, spending most of his time in his room. He tried to keep his mind off everything, but it was impossible. The weight of the situation hung over him like a dark cloud. He could hear Leonardo on the phone, arguing, his voice filled with frustration. Gabriel felt like a burden. He didn't belong here. He was causing trouble for Leonardo, and he hated it. He hated the attention, the questions, the feeling that people were watching them. He felt like an outsider, someone who didn't deserve a place like this. One evening, Leonardo knocked on Gabriel's door. He opened it slowly, poking his head in. Hey, he said, his voice gentle. Can we talk? Gabriel nodded, though he didn't feel like talking. He followed Leonardo to the living room, sitting down on the couch. Leonardo sat across from him, his face serious but kind. Gabriel, I know this is hard, Leonardo began, and I know you're feeling overwhelmed, but I need you to talk to me. Tell me what's going on in your head. Gabriel looked down, his fingers picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. I don't like this, he said quietly. I don't want people talking about me. I don't want them looking at me like I'm some kind of problem. Leonardo's expression softened. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're not a problem, Gabriel. You're not, and I don't care what they say. I don't care what anyone thinks. You're part of my life now. Gabriel looked up, his eyes filled with uncertainty. But why? He asked, his voice breaking. Why are you doing this? I don't understand. I'm just some kid from the street. You don't owe me anything. Leonardo took a deep breath, his eyes clouding with emotion. He was silent for a moment, as if he was trying to find the right words. I guess I need you as much as you need me, he said finally, his voice low. You remind me of someone I lost, my son. Gabriel's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected that. He stared at Leonardo, his eyes wide. Leonardo looked down, his voice filled with pain. I had a son, Gabriel. He was about your age. I lost him in an accident a few years ago. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through. He paused, his eyes glistening with tears. When I saw you that night, in that alley, I saw something in you, a spark, a strength, and I couldn't just walk away. Gabriel felt his chest tighten, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't known that Leonardo was carrying so much pain. I'm not trying to replace him, Leonardo continued, his voice shaky. I know I can't, but I can help you. And maybe, just maybe, you can help me too. Gabriel swallowed, the words catching in his throat. He looked at Leonardo, seeing the raw emotion in his eyes. For the first time, he saw Leonardo not just as the rich man who had taken him in, but as someone who was hurting, just like him. I'm sorry, Gabriel whispered. I didn't know. Leonardo shook his head. You have nothing to be sorry for. This isn't your fault. I just want you to understand why I'm doing this, why I'm not giving up on you. Gabriel nodded, his eyes filling with tears. He wiped them away quickly, not wanting to cry in front of Leonardo. But the emotion was too strong. He had spent so long feeling alone, feeling like no one cared. And now, here was this man, telling him that he mattered, that he was worth something. Leonardo reached over, placing a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. It's okay to be scared, Gabriel, he said softly. But I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that I'm here for you, no matter what. Gabriel looked at him, the tears spilling over. He nodded, his voice trembling. I'll try, he said. "I'll try to trust you." Leonardo smiled, a warmth in his eyes. "That's all I ask." For a while they sat there in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. But it wasn't a heavy silence, it was a comforting one, filled with understanding. Gabriel felt a small sense of relief, a glimmer of hope that maybe things could get better. The next day, Leonardo made a decision. He told Gabriel they were going to face the reporters. They couldn't hide forever, and it was time to take control of the narrative. Gabriel felt his stomach twist with fear, but he nodded. He trusted Leonardo, even if he was still scared. Leonardo called a press conference, inviting the reporters to come to the building's lobby. Gabriel stood beside Leonardo as they waited, his hands trembling. Leonardo looked down at him, giving him a reassuring nod. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," Leonardo said. "Just stay by my side. I've got this." Gabriel nodded, taking a deep breath. The lobby was filled with reporters, their cameras flashing as soon as they saw Leonardo and Gabriel. The noise was overwhelming, the questions coming all at once. "Mr. Leonardo, why did you take this boy in? What's your connection to him? Is this some kind of charity case? Or is there more to the story?" Leonardo held up his hand, his face calm but determined. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice strong. "I want to set the record straight. Gabriel is not a charity case. He's not a publicity stunt. He's a part of my life now, and I care about him deeply." The reporters went quiet for a moment, and Leonardo continued. "Gabriel saved my life. He didn't have to, but he did. And in doing so, he changed my life. I lost my son a few years ago, and Gabriel has given me something I thought I'd never have again. A reason to care. A reason to fight." Gabriel looked up at Leonardo, his heart pounding. He could feel the emotion in Leonardo's words, the truth behind them. Leonardo wasn't just saying this for the reporters, he meant it. Leonardo looked down at Gabriel, a small smile on his face. "He's part of my family now, and nothing anyone says is going to change that." The reporters began to speak again, but Leonardo shook his head. "Nah, that's all I have to say," he said firmly. "Please respect our privacy." He turned, placing a hand on Gabriel's shoulder, guiding him back toward the elevator. Gabriel followed, his heart still pounding, but there was a strange sense of calm, too. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone. He had someone who would fight for him, someone who cared. Back in the apartment, Gabriel looked at Leonardo, his voice shaky. "Thank you," he said. Leonardo smiled, ruffling Gabriel's hair. "You're worth it, Gabriel. Don't ever doubt that." Gabriel nodded, his eyes filled with emotion. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere, like he had a home. The morning of the press conference, Gabriel woke up with a tight feeling in his chest. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to steady his breathing. He had never liked attention, never wanted people looking at him, questioning him. But Leonardo had insisted that this was the right thing to do. It was time to face the media, to make them understand what this was really about. Gabriel got up and got dressed. The new clothes Leonardo had bought him feeling stiff and unfamiliar. He looked at himself in the mirror, seeing the nervousness in his eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to push down the fear. He had to do this, for Leonardo, for himself. Leonardo knocked on his door, peeking in. "Ready?" he asked, his voice soft. Gabriel nodded, though he didn't feel ready at all. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Leonardo smiled, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "You'll be okay, I promise. Just stay by my side." Gabriel nodded again, following Leonardo out of the apartment. They took the elevator down to the lobby, the tension between them heavy. When the doors opened, Gabriel could see the crowd of reporters already waiting. His stomach twisted, and he felt his heart start to race. Leonardo placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Just let me handle it." Gabriel swallowed hard, nodding. He stayed close to Leonardo as they stepped out into the lobby. The cameras flashed, the reporters, voices rising all at once, shouting questions. Gabriel tried to focus on his breathing, tried to block out the noise. Leonardo held up his hand, and the room gradually quieted. He looked calm, confident, and Gabriel tried to draw some of that strength into himself. "Thank you all for coming," Leonardo began, his voice strong and steady. "I wanted to take this opportunity to address some of the rumors and speculation that have been circulating about Gabriel and me. He paused, glancing at Gabriel, who was standing slightly behind him. Gabriel looked up, meeting Leonardo's eyes for a moment before looking back at the ground. "Gabriel is not a charity case," Leonardo continued, his voice filled with emotion. "He's not a publicity stunt. He's a young boy who needed help, and I was fortunate enough to be in a position to give that help. But more than that, Gabriel has become part of my life. He's not just someone I'm helping, he's someone I care about deeply." The reporters were silent, their cameras still clicking, but the shouting had stopped. Gabriel could feel all eyes on them, but he kept his head down, focusing on Leonardo's words. "I lost my son a few years ago," Leonardo said, his voice growing softer, the pain evident in his expression. "It was the hardest thing I've ever been through, and when I met Gabriel, something in me changed. He reminded me of what I had lost, but he also gave me a new sense of hope, a reason to care again." Leonardo paused, looking down at Gabriel. There was a warmth in his eyes, a sincerity that made Gabriel's throat tighten with emotion. I know people are curious. I know they want to understand why I'm doing this," Leonardo said, his voice stronger now. "But it's simple. I care about Gabriel. He's like family to me now, and I will do everything I can to protect him, just like any father would." The reporters began to murmur, a few raising their hands to ask questions, but Leonardo shook his head. "That's all I have to say for now. I ask that you respect our privacy." He turned, placing a hand on Gabriel's shoulder, guiding him back toward the elevator. Gabriel followed, his heart still pounding, but there was a strange sense of calm beneath the fear. Leonardo had spoken from his heart, and Gabriel could feel the truth of his words. As the elevator doors closed, Leonardo looked down at Gabriel, giving him a reassuring smile. "You okay?" he asked. Gabriel nodded, though his chest still felt tight. "Yeah, I think so." Leonardo squeezed his shoulder. "You did great, Gabriel. I know that wasn't easy." Gabriel looked up at him, his eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Leonardo smiled. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad you're here." Back in the apartment, the tension began to lift. Leonardo made lunch, a simple meal of sandwiches and fruit. They sat at the kitchen table, eating in silence for a while. Gabriel felt tired, emotionally drained, but there was also a sense of relief. It was over. They had faced the reporters, told their story, and now maybe they could move forward. After lunch, Leonardo looked at Gabriel, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Gabriel, you were really brave today." "I'm proud of you," Gabriel shrugged, trying to downplay it. "I just stood there." Leonardo shook his head. "No, you did more than that. You faced something that scared you, and that takes real courage." Gabriel looked down, his cheeks flushing slightly. He wasn't used to compliments. He wasn't used to someone being proud of him. It felt strange, but also good. Leonardo smiled, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "You know, Gabriel, I think this is just the beginning for you. I think you can do a lot of great things, if you let yourself believe it." Gabriel looked up, meeting Leonardo's eyes. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have a different kind of life, a better life. "Maybe," Gabriel said quietly. "I want to try." Leonardo's smile widened. "That's all I ask. One day at a time, right?" Gabriel nodded. One day at a time. The rest of the day passed quietly. Leonardo suggested they go for a walk, just to clear their heads, and Gabriel agreed. They walked through the park, the air crisp and cool, the sun beginning to set. Gabriel watched the other people, families, couples, kids playing, and he felt a small pang of longing. He had never had that, a normal life. But maybe, with Leonardo, he could have something close to it. As they walked, Leonardo looked over at Gabriel, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Gabriel, I've been thinking, I know school didn't work out the first time, but I still think it's important for you to get an education. Maybe we can find another way, something that works better for you." Gabriel hesitated, the fear creeping back in. He remembered how out of place he had felt, how much he had wanted to run away. But then he looked at Leonardo, saw the hope in his eyes, and he nodded. "Maybe we can try again," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Leonardo smiled, a look of pride in his eyes. "I think that's a good idea. We'll take it slow, find something that fits you. No pressure." Gabriel nodded, feeling a mix of fear and hope. It wouldn't be easy, but he wanted to try. He wanted to make Leonardo proud. He wanted to prove to himself that he could do it. As they headed back to the apartment, Gabriel felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't alone anymore. He had someone who cared about him, someone who believed in him, and maybe, just maybe, he could start to believe in himself too. The following day felt different. Gabriel woke up with a sense of purpose, a new kind of determination. It wasn't that his fears had vanished. They were still there, lingering in the back of his mind. But there was also a new hope, a small light that made him want to push forward, to try. Leonardo greeted him in the kitchen, a bright smile on his face. He was cooking breakfast again, scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. The smell filled the room, and Gabriel's stomach growled. He felt a little embarrassed, but Leonardo just smiled wider. "Morning, Gabriel. Hungry?" he asked. Gabriel nodded, sliding into a seat at the table. "Yeah, a bit." Leonardo served him a plate, then sat down across from him. "I was thinking," he said, his tone casual, "that maybe we could look into a different kind of schooling for you. Something less formal, maybe even some tutoring. What do you think?" Gabriel hesitated, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. He had spent most of the previous day thinking about it, trying to convince himself that he could do it. And now, looking at Leonardo's hopeful face, he realized that he wanted to try. He owed it to himself, and to Leonardo, to at least make an effort. "Yeah," Gabriel said slowly, "I think that might work better. I want to try." Leonardo's face lit up, his smile reaching his eyes. "That's great, Gabriel. I'll make some calls today, see what our options are. We'll find something that works for you. I promise." Gabriel nodded, his chest feeling lighter. They ate in silence for a while, the tension that had been hanging between them slowly melting away. Gabriel felt a warmth spreading through him, the beginnings of something like happiness. After breakfast, Leonardo suggested they go back to the park. The previous day's walk had been calming, and Gabriel had enjoyed the quiet moments, the sense of normalcy. They headed out together, the crisp air biting at their faces. The park was bustling with people, kids playing, parents chatting, people walking their dogs. Gabriel watched the kids, a small smile tugging at his lips. He remembered when he used to play like that, when he was younger, before everything had changed, before the streets had become his home. He felt a pang of sadness, but it was different now. It wasn't just sadness, there was hope there too, a sense that maybe things could be different. As they walked, Leonardo pointed out a small playground. "Want to sit for a bit?" he asked, gesturing to a nearby bench. Gabriel nodded, and they sat down, watching the children play. Leonardo was quiet for a moment before he turned to Gabriel, his eyes thoughtful. "You know, Gabriel, I never thought I'd have another chance to be a father. After losing my son, I thought that part of my life was over." Gabriel looked at him, the weight of Leonardo's words hanging between them. He could hear the pain in Leonardo's voice, the loss that still haunted him. Leonardo smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "But then I met you, and it changed everything. You gave me something I didn't even realize I needed. A reason to care again. A reason to fight." Gabriel swallowed, his throat tight with emotion. He didn't know what to say. He had spent so long feeling like he didn't matter, like he was just a burden. But here was Leonardo, telling him that he mattered, that he was important. It was almost too much to take in. "Thank you," Gabriel whispered, his voice barely audible. Leonardo looked at him, his eyes filled with warmth. "No, Gabriel, thank you. You've brought something back into my life that I thought I'd lost forever." They sat in silence for a while, watching the children play. The sun was beginning to set, the sky turning shades of pink and orange. Gabriel felt a sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a place where he belonged. On the way back to the apartment, Leonardo stopped by a small bookstore. He led Gabriel inside, the smell of old books filling the air. Gabriel followed him to a section near the back, where they found a shelf filled with textbooks and learning guides. "I thought we could start here," Leonardo said, picking up a book on basic mathematics. "Nothing too formal, just some things to help you get back into it." Gabriel nodded, taking the book from Leonardo's hand. He flipped through the pages, the words and numbers swimming before his eyes. He felt a pang of fear, the old doubts creeping back in. But then he looked up at Leonardo, saw the encouragement in his eyes, and he took a deep breath. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "You on, let's do it." They bought a few books, some on math, some on reading, and a couple of novels Leonardo thought Gabriel might like. They headed back to the apartment, and Leonardo cleared a space at the dining table for them to work. Gabriel sat down, the books spread out before him, and for a moment, he felt overwhelmed. But Leonardo was there, sitting beside him, guiding him through each problem, each exercise. It wasn't easy. Gabriel struggled at first, his mind rusty from years of not using it in that way. But Leonardo was patient, his voice gentle and encouraging. He never got frustrated, never made Gabriel feel like he was failing. And slowly, little by little, Gabriel began to understand. He began to remember things he thought he had forgotten. The hours passed quickly, and by the time they were done, Gabriel felt exhausted but proud. He looked at Leonardo, a small smile on his face. "I think I'm starting to get it," he said. Leonardo beamed, ruffling Gabriel's hair. "I knew you would. You're a smart kid, Gabriel. You just needed a chance." Gabriel felt a warmth spread through him at Leonardo's words. He had never thought of himself as smart before. He had always just been a street kid, trying to survive. But now, sitting here, he felt like maybe he could be more than that. Maybe he could be someone. That night, as Gabriel lay in bed, he thought about the day. It had been hard, but it had also been good. He had taken a step forward, a small step, but a step nonetheless. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. He closed his eyes, a sense of calm washing over him. One day at a time, he reminded himself, he could do this. He wasn't alone anymore. He had Leonardo, and together, they could face whatever came their way. The next few weeks brought a new rhythm to Gabriel's life. Every morning, he woke up early, made his bed, and joined Leonardo for breakfast. They had settled into a routine. After eating, they would work together at the dining table, going through the books they had bought. Leonardo was patient, and Gabriel found himself slowly growing more comfortable with learning. It wasn't perfect. There were days when Gabriel felt overwhelmed, when he wanted to give up, when he felt like the street kid who didn't belong anywhere. But every time that feeling started to creep in, Leonardo was there, giving him encouragement, reminding him that he was worth it. And somehow, that made all the difference. One morning, after their usual study session, Leonardo looked over at Gabriel, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I think you've been working really hard, Gabriel. Maybe we should take a break today. How about we go somewhere special?" Gabriel looked up, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "Where?" he asked. Leonardo smiled, a hint of excitement in his expression. "It's a surprise. Come on, get your jacket." Gabriel hurried to his room, pulling on his jacket, the sense of excitement growing. He wasn't sure where they were going, but it felt good to get out of the apartment, to do something different. They took the car, driving through the city until they reached a park on the edge of town. It wasn't like the smaller parks they had visited before. This one was big, with wide open spaces, trails winding through the trees, and a lake in the middle. There were people everywhere, families having picnics, kids playing, couples walking hand in hand. Leonardo parked the car, and they got out, the crisp air filling Gabriel's lungs. He looked around, taking it all in. It was beautiful, peaceful. He hadn't seen a place like this in a long time. Leonardo led him toward the lake, where they found a spot under a tree. They sat down, the breeze rustling the leaves above them, the sound of laughter and birds filling the air. Leonardo opened a small bag he had brought with him, pulling out sandwiches and drinks. He handed one to Gabriel, who took it with a smile. "Thanks," Gabriel said, unwrapping the sandwich. Leonardo nodded, a soft smile on his face. "I thought we could use a day off. You've been working so hard, Gabriel. I'm proud of you." Gabriel looked down, a warmth spreading through him. He took a bite of his sandwich, the words sinking in. Proud. It was a word he wasn't used to hearing, especially directed at him. It felt good. It made him feel like maybe he was doing something right. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the people around them. Gabriel noticed a group of kids playing with a ball nearby, their laughter filling the air. He watched them, a pang of longing in his chest. He had never had friends like that, never had that kind of carefree happiness. Leonardo seemed to notice the look on Gabriel's face. He followed Gabriel's gaze, then turned back to him, his eyes filled with understanding. "You know, Gabriel, it's never too late to have those things," he said gently. "To make friends, to be happy. You deserve that." Gabriel looked at him, uncertainty in his eyes. "But what if they don't like me? What if they find out where I came from?" he asked, his voice quiet. Leonardo shook his head. The people who are worth having in your life won't care about that. They'll care about who you are, Gabriel, and who you are is a good person, someone who is brave and kind. Gabriel looked down, his throat tight. He wanted to believe Leonardo, but it was hard. He had spent so long feeling like he was nothing, like he didn't matter. But maybe, with Leonardo's help, he could start to see himself differently. Do you want to go over and play? Leonardo asked, nodding toward the group of kids. Gabriel hesitated, the fear twisting in his stomach. He wasn't sure if he could do it, but then he looked at Leonardo, saw the encouragement in his eyes, and he nodded slowly. Okay, he said, his voice shaky but determined. Leonardo smiled, giving Gabriel's shoulder a gentle squeeze. Go on, I'll be right here. Gabriel stood up, taking a deep breath. He walked slowly over to the group of kids, his heart pounding in his chest. They were laughing, kicking the ball back and forth, and for a moment, Gabriel hesitated, not sure what to say. One of the boys noticed him, stopping and looking at Gabriel with a curious expression. Hey, the boy said. You want to play? Gabriel blinked, surprised. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, if that's okay. The boy grinned, kicking the ball toward Gabriel. Of course, come on. Gabriel caught the ball with his foot, the feeling of inclusion washing over him. He kicked it back, and soon, he was in the middle of the game, the laughter and shouts filling his ears. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was just a kid, like he belonged. He felt free. Leonardo watched from a distance, a smile on his face. He could see the change in Gabriel, the way he was opening up, the way he was starting to believe in himself. It made Leonardo's heart swell with pride. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt. But he also knew that Gabriel had come a long way, and he was ready to face whatever came next. As the sun began to set, the kids started to drift away, their parents calling them home. Gabriel jogged back to where Leonardo was sitting, his face flushed, a smile brightening his features. That looked like fun, Leonardo said, his eyes twinkling. Gabriel nodded, breathing heavily. Yeah, it was. I haven't done something like that in a long time. Leonardo smiled, standing up. I'm glad, Gabriel. You deserve to have fun, to be happy. They walked back to the car together, the sky turning shades of pink and purple. Gabriel felt a sense of calm, a feeling of contentment that he hadn't felt in years. He looked over at Leonardo, a warmth spreading through him. He knew it wasn't perfect. He knew there would still be hard days, still be moments when he felt lost or scared. But he also knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had someone who cared about him, someone who believed in him. Back at the apartment, Gabriel helped Leonardo prepare dinner. They moved around the kitchen together, a sense of ease between them. It felt like home, like family. After they ate, they sat in the living room, Leonardo reading a book while Gabriel worked through one of his lessons. The quiet sounds of the city drifted in through the window, the feeling of safety and warmth wrapping around Gabriel like a blanket. As the night drew to a close, Gabriel looked over at Leonardo, his voice soft. Thank you for everything. Leonardo looked up, his eyes meeting Gabriel's. He smiled, a warmth in his expression. You don't have to thank me, Gabriel. I'm just happy you're here. Gabriel nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a future that was bright, filled with possibility, and most importantly, he felt like he was part of a family. Not a perfect one, but a real one. One where he was loved, where he was wanted. He closed his eyes that night, a sense of peace washing over him. One day at a time, he could do this. He had Leonardo, and together, they would face whatever came next.